Jake Morrison stood in the center of the great hall and felt small. The walls rose high above him, covered in symbols from 100 different worlds. Each symbol told the story of a race that had joined the Galactic Council long before humans ever looked at the stars. The air smelled strange, like metal and flowers mixed together. It always made his nose itch, but he never showed it. Around him sat the council members. They looked down at him from their tall chairs like judges deciding the fate of a criminal. The Zephyrian delegate had skin that looked like blue crystal. When light hit him just right, he sparkled like a diamond. His name was Vextar, and he spoke for a race that had been traveling between stars for 5,000 years. Next to him sat the Keldan representative. She looked like a giant bug with too many arms and eyes that moved in all directions. Her kind had built the first space stations when humans were still learning to make fire. Jake had been coming to these meetings for 3 years now. 3 long years of listening to these ancient beings tell him what humans could and could not do. 3 years of nodding and smiling while they treated his people like children who needed to be taught how to behave. 3 years of hearing about how young and inexperienced humanity was compared to the great civilizations that ruled the galaxy. Today felt different, though. Today, Jake knew something that none of these proud aliens suspected. He checked his watch. 15 minutes left. Just 15 more minutes of pretending to be the grateful student learning from wise teachers. Vextar was speaking again in his cold voice that sounded like wind blowing through ice caves. The human request for expanded mining rights in the Outer Rim is denied once more. Perhaps in another 50 years your people will have developed the wisdom necessary to handle such responsibility. The other council members made sounds of agreement. Some chittered like insects. Others hummed deep notes that made the floor vibrate. Jake nodded politely like he had been trained to do. Of course, honored Vextar. We understand that wisdom comes with time and experience. We are grateful for your guidance in these matters. The words tasted bitter in his mouth, but he had said them so many times they came out smooth as silk. The Altarian military observer leaned forward in his chair. He had 4 arms and eyes like a hawk. His people were known for being the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Your species shows promise in ground combat, he said in a voice like gravel, grinding together. But you lack the discipline for space warfare. Your ships are crude and your tactics are those of children playing games. More agreement from around the circle, more condescending nods and superior looks. Jake smiled and bowed his head. We hope to learn from your vast experience, honored General. High above the council chamber, Captain Lisa Hayes watched everything through the cameras built into the walls. She sat on the bridge of the USS Liberty, a ship that looked ordinary from the outside but held secrets that would shock every alien in that room below. Her crew moved quietly around her, checking systems and preparing for what was about to happen. How much longer, Captain? Asked Commander Rick Santos. He stood beside her chair, his hands clasped behind his back. His voice was steady, but she could see the excitement in his eyes. They had all been waiting for this day. 12 minutes, Lisa replied without taking her eyes off the screen. Down in the chamber, Jake was listening to another lecture about human limitations. This one came from the Meridian Trade Representative, a creature that looked like a walking plant with too many mouths. She was explaining why humans were not ready to establish their own trade routes. Your economy is still too primitive, the plant thing was saying. You depend too heavily on raw resource extraction. You have not learned the subtle arts of interstellar commerce. Perhaps in a century or 2 you will be ready for such advanced concepts. Jake nodded again. We are honored by your patience with our inexperience. Inside his head he was counting down the minutes. 10 minutes left. 10 minutes until the most arrogant collection of beings in the galaxy learned what human patience really meant. The Raxan delegate spoke next. His people looked like walking trees made of metal, and they claimed to be the oldest civilization in the galaxy. Humans, he said in a voice like thunder rolling across mountains, must learn their place in the cosmic order. You are newcomers here. In galactic terms, your species emerged from your planet yesterday. It would be wise to listen more and speak less. Indeed, said Jake. We have much to learn from the accumulated wisdom of the ages. He checked his watch. Again. 8 minutes. Back on the Liberty, the communications officer looked up from her station. Admiral Phillips is ready to begin the transmission, Captain. Excellent, Lisa said. And our friends? All ships are in position. The demonstration sites are prepared. Everything is ready. Lisa allowed herself a small smile. For 3 years, they had all played their parts perfectly. While Jake stood in council chambers accepting lectures about human inadequacy, the real work had been happening in the dark spaces between the stars. While aliens debated whether humans deserved a voice in galactic affairs, humanity had been building something that would change everything. Down in the chamber, Vextar was speaking again. The council has decided to grant humans observer status. In the Border Commission, he announced like he was giving away a precious gift. This is a great honor for such a young species. You may watch as your betters decide matters of interstellar boundaries. The other delegates made approving sounds. Some actually applauded as if they had just done something wonderfully generous. Jake felt his jaw muscles tighten but kept his expression grateful and humble. The council is most generous, he said. We are deeply honored by this opportunity to observe the wisdom of our elders. 5 minutes left. In 5 minutes, every single being in this chamber would understand that they had made the greatest mistake in galactic history. They had assumed that because humans were young, they were weak. They had believed that because humanity was new to space, they could be controlled and managed like pets. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Jake Morrison straightened his tie and prepared for the moment when humanity's 3 years of careful deception would finally come to an end. The first sign that something had changed came without warning. Every screen in the council chamber suddenly flickered to life at exactly the same moment. The aliens looked around in confusion as their own displays turned against them. Then a human face appeared on every monitor, wall display, and holographic projector in the room. Admiral Kate Phillips looked out at the assembled delegates with the same polite expression that humans had worn for 3 years. Her uniform was crisp and clean, with insignia that made several aliens lean forward to get a better look. The symbols on her shoulders were not the simple designs they remembered from human military gear. Greetings, Galactic Council, she said in a voice that carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. We thought it was time for a small demonstration of human capabilities. Vextar rose from his crystalline throne, his blue face darkening to purple. What is the meaning of this interruption? How did you gain access to our communication systems? Admiral Phillips smiled the way a teacher might smile at a student who had just asked a very simple question. We've been connected to your systems for quite some time now, honored Vextar, among other things. The view on the screen shifted. Instead of the Admiral's face, the delegates found themselves looking at something that should not have existed. A massive orbital construction hung in space above a star system that most of them recognized. The Kepler system had been empty the last time Council Scouts had checked it. Now it bristled with structures that dwarfed anything in the galactic. Databases' ships moved between the orbital platforms like schools of fish. But these were not the crude human vessels that the Council remembered. These ships had sleek lines and moved with precision that spoke of advanced engineering. More importantly, there were hundreds of them. The Council had believed that humanity possessed perhaps 24 combat-capable vessels. What they were seeing on the screen suggested a fleet that rivaled any single Council member's navy. The Altarian military observer stood up so quickly that his chair fell backward. His 4 eyes focused on the screen with the intensity of a predator studying dangerous prey. This is impossible, he said in his gravelly voice. Our intelligence reports indicated no such construction, no such fleet. Lieutenant Colonel Ben Parker stepped forward to stand beside Jake Morrison. He had been silent during the entire council session, playing the role of a simple aide. Now he spoke with the confidence of someone who had been keeping very important secrets. Your intelligence saw exactly what we wanted it to see, he said. 3 years is a long time when you know how to use it properly. The screens changed again. This time they showed mining operations on asteroids and moons throughout Council space. But these were not small human outposts, struggling to extract basic materials. These were industrial complexes that made the great factories of the Meridian Empire look like children's toys. Automated systems moved tons of refined materials into waiting cargo ships. The scale was breathtaking. Dr. Amy Foster appeared on one of the screens. She stood in what was clearly a research facility, surrounded by equipment that several council members recognized as advanced beyond anything their own scientists had achieved. Behind her, humans and aliens worked side by side on projects that the council had never approved. "We took your advice about patience very seriously," she said. 3 years of learning, building, and preparing. We've been excellent students." The Keldon representative made a chittering sound of distress. "Where did you acquire such technology? These designs are beyond human understanding." Dr. Foster's smile was patient and kind. "You're quite right. They were beyond our understanding. That's why we learned from so many different teachers. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're not limited to learning from just one source." More images flashed across the screens. Humans working alongside species that the council barely recognized. Some were from the frontier regions that the council had deemed too dangerous or unprofitable to explore. Others were from civilizations that had been conquered or absorbed by council members centuries ago. All of them were now working with humanity on projects that the council had never imagined. General Steve Carter's voice echoed through the chamber as the screens showed defensive installations that made the council's border fortresses look like ancient castles. "While you were debating whether we deserved a voice in border disputes, we were establishing our own borders. We found that many species were eager to discuss alternatives to council membership. The implications hit different delegates at different speeds. The trade-focused Meridians understood first. If humans had industrial capacity on this scale, combined with new trading partners, the economic balance of the galaxy would shift overnight. The Altarians grasped the military implications almost as quickly. Human defensive capabilities meant that the old assumptions about power projection were now meaningless. Vextar's crystalline form was flickering with colors that indicated extreme agitation. "This is a violation of galactic law. Unsanctioned expansion, unauthorized military construction, unlawful contact with restricted species." Jake Morrison finally allowed his diplomatic mask to slip. For 3 years he had smiled and nodded and played the part of the grateful junior partner. Now his face showed what he really thought about the council's laws and restrictions. "Whose law?" he asked. "The law that you wrote to keep yourselves in power? The law that conveniently ensures that older species maintain control while newer civilizations serve at your pleasure?" The screens changed once more. This time they showed legal documents and treaty analyses that made it clear humans had done their homework. Every action they had taken was technically legal under galactic law. They had simply interpreted that law in ways that the council had never considered. Colonel Nancy Webb appeared on screen from what was obviously a legal research facility. "We've had some very talented lawyers working on these questions for quite some time," she said. "It turns out that galactic law is surprisingly flexible when you read it carefully, just like you've been doing for centuries." Captain Lisa Hayes watched from the bridge of the Liberty as panic began to spread through the council chamber. Her crew was monitoring communications throughout council space as the news of humanity's true capabilities spread. Fleet commanders were demanding explanations. Planetary governors were asking for emergency sessions. Trade ministers were frantically trying to calculate the economic impact. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving priority transmissions from 18 council worlds. They're all asking the same question." "Which is? How did we miss this?" Lisa smiled. "Tell them they'll have their answer soon." Enough. Down in the chamber, the delegates were beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about humanity was wrong. The grateful students had become something else entirely, while their teachers weren't watching. The true scope of human preparation became clear as Admiral Phillips continued the presentation. Star maps appeared on every screen in the chamber, but these were not the maps that the council kept in their official records. These charts showed hundreds of points of light scattered across space that had supposedly been empty. Each point represented a human settlement, research station, or military installation that the council had never detected. The Raxan delegate stood up slowly, his metal tree body creaking like an ancient forest in the wind. His people were known for their long memories and careful planning. They prided themselves on thinking in terms of centuries rather than years. What he was seeing on the screens challenged everything he understood about strategic patience. This distribution pattern, he said in his thunder voice, suggests a planning timeline that exceeds our estimates of human strategic thinking. Your species has been active for only 3 galactic standard years since joining the Council. Professor Ellen Brooks appeared on the central screen. She stood in front of a massive industrial complex that stretched beyond the camera's view. Behind her, automated systems moved materials and components with efficiency that made the great factories of the Meridian Empire look primitive by comparison. Actually, she said with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious, we've been planning this since before we made first contact with your scouts. We just didn't mention it during the initial negotiations. The implications of her words sent waves of shock through the assembled delegates. First contact protocols required new species to declare all significant off-world activities. Humanity had declared only a few small colonies and research outposts. The Council had based all their policies toward humans on those limited declarations. General Steve Carter's image replaced the professor's. He stood on what was clearly the command deck of a military facility that dwarfed anything in Council defensive networks. Through the windows behind him, the delegates could see ships that incorporated design elements from a dozen different species, all improved and refined by human engineering. We learned patience from the Raxans, he said, nodding toward the metal tree. Delegate. We learned industrial efficiency from the Meridians. We learned defensive strategy from the Altarians. But most importantly, we learned that the Council prefers to teach rather than to listen. The screen split to show multiple views simultaneously. Mining operations that processed asteroids faster than Council equipment could scan them. Research. Facilities where humans worked alongside species that the Council had written off as primitive or irrelevant. Diplomatic compounds where representatives from dozens of non-Council civilizations gathered under human protection. Captain Pete Johnson appeared in one section of the display. He stood on the bridge of a ship that was clearly positioned near Altarian space. The star patterns visible through his viewports made it obvious that human vessels were already in position throughout Council territory. Not as invaders, but as equals who would no longer accept secondary status. We've also learned the importance of good intelligence gathering, he said. 3 years of studying Council fleet movements, communication patterns, and strategic priorities. You've been very educational. The Altarian military observer was staring at the tactical displays with the focus of a professional warrior analyzing a battle plan. His forearms moved restlessly as he calculated firing angles and response times. What he was seeing suggested that humanity had not just achieved military parity with the Council. They had achieved tactical superiority through better positioning and preparation. Your deployment pattern, he said slowly, indicates knowledge of our defensive strategies that should not exist. These positions exploit weaknesses in our grid formations that are classified at the highest levels. Dr. Tony Martinez smiled from a research station that was clearly repurposing Council technology. Around him, human scientists worked with equipment that bore the markings of multiple Council species. Classified from whom? He asked. We've been talking to a lot of people over the past 3 years. People who felt excluded from Council decision-making. People who had valuable information to share. The economic implications hit the Meridian delegates like a physical blow. Their trade empire was built on controlling resource flows and manufacturing bottlenecks. What they were seeing suggested that humanity had built alternative supply chains that could operate independently of Council oversight. Worse, they had done it by partnering with species that the Council had ignored or dismissed. Senator Chris Adams appeared on screen from what was obviously a diplomatic facility. Behind him stood representatives from species that many Council members had never seen before. Some were from the galactic rim regions that the Council considered too dangerous to explore. Others were from civilizations that had been absorbed into Council member empires so long ago that most people had forgotten they ever existed independently. We've been busy establishing relationships with non-Council species, he said. Amazing how many civilizations felt overlooked by your organization. Amazing how eager they were to discuss alternatives. Vextar's crystalline form was now flickering, between colors so rapidly that it hurt to look at him directly. "You have violated every principle of galactic order," he said in a voice like breaking glass. "Unauthorized contact with restricted species, unregistered military construction, unlawful territorial expansion." Jake Morrison stepped forward, and for the first time in 3 years he looked like what he really was, not a grateful supplicant, seeking council approval, but the representative of a civilization that had just announced its independence. "Restricted by whom?" he asked. "You? On what authority?" "We've read galactic law very carefully, honored Vextar. We've had excellent legal advice." He gestured toward the screens where Colonel Webb was displaying treaty documents and legal precedents. "Every action we've taken has been within the letter of galactic law. The same law you've been using to restrict us." The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates began urgent communications with their home governments. Emergency channels crackled with demands for information and orders for immediate response. But as military commanders tried to mobilize their fleets, they discovered that human vessels were already in position to monitor or intercept any aggressive moves. Captain Hayes watched from the Liberty as council response teams found themselves facing a problem they had never imagined. Human intelligence networks had given them perfect knowledge of council capabilities and positions. Every secret base, every hidden fleet, every classified weapon system had been mapped and analyzed. "It's beautiful," whispered Commander Santos, as he watched the tactical displays show council forces realizing their disadvantage. 3 years of letting them think they were teaching us, while we were actually studying them. Admiral Phillips appeared on the main screen one final time. Behind her, the scope of human preparation was finally becoming clear, not just ships and stations, but an entire shadow civilization that had grown up in the spaces between council worlds. 3 years ago," she said, "you told us that respect must be earned through patience and wisdom. You told us that young species must prove themselves worthy of equality. Well, honored council members, we've earned it." The age of council dominance was ending, and everyone in the chamber knew it. The chamber had become a storm of frantic activity as delegates realized the magnitude of what was happening. Council members who had spent centuries believing in their own superiority were suddenly faced with evidence that they had been outmaneuvered by the species they considered least capable. Emergency communication channels buzzed with orders and demands, but the responses coming back from council space were not what anyone expected. Vextar's crystalline form had stabilized into a deep, red color that spoke of rage barely contained. "This is an act of war against the established galactic order," he declared, his voice carrying the authority of 5,000 years of Zephyrian dominance. "The Council will not tolerate such blatant defiance of our authority." Jake Morrison looked at the alien delegate with the same polite expression he had worn for 3 years. But now there was something else in his eyes, something that made even the battle-hardened Altarian observer step back slightly. "War?" Jake asked. "Against whom? We haven't attacked anyone, we haven't invaded any territory, we haven't violated any treaties. We've simply built our own civilization in spaces you declared worthless. If that's an act of war, then perhaps your definition of war needs revision." The screens around the chamber showed the responses coming in from Council military commanders throughout the galaxy. Fleet after fleet reported the same impossible situation: human vessels in perfect position to monitor, intercept, or engage any council force that tried to respond aggressively. 3 years of careful intelligence gathering had given humanity a complete map of council defensive positions and capabilities. Colonel Nancy Webb appeared on the central display again, this time with a stack of legal documents that reached almost to the ceiling behind her. "We've been very careful about the legal implications of our actions," she said. "Every settlement we've established is in space that council surveys declared uninhabitable or commercially worthless. Every alliance we've formed is with species that were either never offered council membership or were conquered so long ago that their independent status was forgotten." The legal reality was becoming clear to the council's own advisors. Humanity had not violated galactic law because they had written their own interpretation of that law. They had found every loophole, every ambiguity, every contradictory clause and used them to build a legal framework for independence that the Council's own courts would have to recognize. The Raxan delegate's metal body groaned as he processed the implications. Your species has demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that our analysts deemed impossible, he said slowly. The coordination required for this undertaking suggests planning capabilities that exceed our understanding of human cognitive development. Dr. Amy Foster smiled from her research station. That's because you were measuring us against your own development patterns, she said. You assumed that because we're young, we think like children. But humans don't develop the same way your species do. We learn faster, adapt quicker, and think in ways that your models couldn't predict. The truth was more disturbing than any council member wanted to admit. They had measured humanity against their own historical development and found humans lacking in experience and wisdom. But they had failed to account for the human capacity for rapid learning and parallel processing. While council species had developed their capabilities over millennia, humans had compressed that learning into decades. Captain Pete Johnson's transmission came from his position near the Altarian home system. His ship was not alone. Through the viewports behind him, the delegates could see an entire human fleet positioned in what the Altarians had considered impregnable space. We've learned patience from you, he said to the assembled council. We've learned diplomacy from you. We've learned technology from you. But most importantly, we've learned how galactic politics really work. And we've learned that the only way to earn respect in this galaxy is to be strong enough to demand it. The economic reports began flooding in from Meridian space. Human industrial complexes were already producing goods at rates that threatened to collapse traditional market structures. Worse, they were doing it in partnership with species that had been providing raw materials to council worlds for centuries. Supply chains that had remained stable for millennia were breaking down as suppliers found more attractive alternatives. The Meridian trade representative made a sound like leaves rustling in a deadly wind. Your economic activities will destabilize entire sectors, she said. Billions of beings depend on the current trade relationships for their survival. Senator Chris Adams looked out from his diplomatic facility where representatives from dozens of non-council species were clearly preparing to make their own announcements. Billions of beings who were never given a choice in those arrangements, he replied. Amazing how eager they are to try something different when someone offers them better terms. Admiral Phillips appeared on the main screen once more, and this time the view behind her showed the full scope of what humanity had accomplished, not just military and industrial capabilities, but an entire alternative to the council system. A confederation of equals rather than a hierarchy of masters and servants. The council system worked well when it represented the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, she said. But it stopped being about advancement long ago. It became about control, about maintaining existing power structures regardless of merit or contribution. The charges came from multiple directions as council military forces tried to respond to the crisis. But every move they made was anticipated, every formation was countered, every strategy was neutralized by human forces that seemed to know their intentions before they did. General Steve Carter's voice echoed through the chamber as tactical displays showed council fleets finding themselves isolated and outmaneuvered. 3 years of studying your military doctrines, your communication protocols, your command structures. We know how you think, how you plan, how you fight, and we've designed our entire strategy around that knowledge. The Altarian military observer was staring at the displays with the fascination of a professional watching a masterwork of strategic planning unfold. You have turned our own strengths against us, he said with something that might have been admiration. Every advantage we possessed has become a vulnerability through your preparation. Vextar made one final attempt to assert council authority. The galactic community will never accept this disruption of cosmic order, he declared. Species throughout the galaxy will rally to preserve the stability that the Council has maintained for millennia. The response came not from any human, but from the screens themselves as they filled with images from across the galaxy. Council member worlds were discovering that their own populations were not as loyal as their governments had assumed. Species that had been absorbed into Council empires centuries ago were remembering their independence. Frontier civilizations, that had been ignored or dismissed were announcing their intention to join the Human Confederation. Jake Morrison watched the chaos spreading through the chamber and felt no satisfaction, only tired relief that the pretense was finally over. For 3 years he had smiled and nodded while beings who considered themselves his superiors explained why humanity wasn't ready for equality. Now they were learning what humans had accomplished while their teachers weren't paying attention. "The age of council dominance is ending," he said quietly. "Welcome to a galaxy where merit matters more than age, where cooperation replaces condescension, and where humanity stands as an equal among the stars." The transformation of galactic civilization happened faster than anyone had thought possible. Within hours of humanity's revelation, the carefully maintained order that had governed the galaxy for millennia began to crumble. Council emergency. Sessions were called on dozens of worlds, but the responses they received painted a picture that no one in the chamber wanted to accept. The first formal announcement came from the Kepler system, where Admiral Phillips stood before a gathering that represented more species than the Council had seen in its entire history. Behind her, the orbital installations that had shocked the Council delegates were revealed to be just the beginning. Construction platforms were building new ships at a rate that defied every projection Council economists had ever made. Humanity hereby withdraws from its probationary membership in the Galactic Council, she announced to a galaxy that was watching through every communication channel available. Effective immediately, we establish the Terran Confederation as an alternative to the existing galactic order. Membership is open to any species that believes in cooperation rather than domination. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Species that the Council had ignored for centuries stepped forward to announce their intention to join the new Confederation. Civilizations that had been conquered and absorbed so long ago that most people had forgotten their original names declared their independence and requested membership. Even some current Council member species began to split as planetary governments chose different paths than their imperial leadership. Jake Morrison watched from the Council chamber as delegate after delegate received emergency communications from their homeworlds. The Keldan representative was chittering in distress as she learned that 3 of her species' colony worlds had declared independence and announced their intention to join the Human Confederation. The Altarian military observer was stone-faced as he processed reports that suggested significant portions of his empire's military were defecting to the new alliance. Vextar's crystalline form had gone completely black, a color that Zephyrians only displayed in the face of absolute catastrophe. "This is madness," he said in a voice that barely carried across the chamber. "The galaxy cannot simply abandon millions of years of developed civilization for the promises of a species that has barely learned to leave its home planet." Dr. Tony Martinez appeared on screen from a facility that was clearly expanding even as he spoke. Behind him, construction crews that included members from dozens of species worked together on projects that seemed to grow larger by the hour. "The galaxy isn't abandoning anything," he said. "We're building something better, something that includes everyone instead of just the species that happened to develop space travel first." The economic implications were staggering. The Meridian Empire's trade networks, built over thousands of years, were collapsing as supplier species found better deals with the Terran Confederation. The industrial output of human facilities was already exceeding Council projections for the next century. Most shocking of all, the technological innovations emerging from human research stations were advancing at a pace that made traditional development timelines meaningless. Professor Ellen Brooks transmitted from a research complex where humans worked alongside scientists from species that the Council had written off as intellectually inferior. "It turns out that diversity of thought produces better results than hierarchy of authority," she explained to a galaxy that was rapidly learning to question its basic assumptions. "When you include everyone in the conversation, you get solutions that no single species could have imagined." Captain Lisa Hayes stood on the bridge of the Liberty as reports flooded in from across human space. Every installation, every fleet, every research facility was exceeding its operational parameters. The Confederation was growing faster than even the most optimistic human projections had suggested. "Admiral," reported her communications officer, "we're receiving membership applications from 47 different species. The integration teams are requesting additional personnel to handle the processing. And our response capacity? Already expanding. The construction platforms are working at maximum efficiency. We'll have housing and facilities ready for new member populations within standard weeks. The speed of the transformation was itself a demonstration of human capabilities that the Council had never suspected. While Council decisions required committees and subcommittees and years of deliberation, the Terran Confederation was making choices and implementing them in real time. Commander Rick Santos watched the tactical displays as Council fleets tried to position themselves for some kind of response to the crisis. But every move they made was anticipated and countered by human forces that seemed to be everywhere at once. It's like they're playing chess while we're playing a game they've never seen before, he observed. They're trying to use strategies that worked for thousands of years against an opponent that learned those strategies and then developed better ones. The final revelation came when Admiral Phillips announced the existence of the Sol Defense Network. The massive fortification system around Earth incorporated technologies from every species in the galaxy, improved by human engineering and powered by industrial capabilities that dwarfed anything in Council space. "This is humanity's home," she said as images of the defense network filled screens across the galaxy. "But it's also the capital of a confederation that includes everyone who believes in equality over hierarchy, cooperation over domination, and merit over age." The Council delegates watched in stunned silence as the screens showed Earth surrounded by defensive installations that made their own homeworld protections look primitive. More importantly, the installations were clearly designed not just to defend Earth, but to serve as bases for expansion throughout the galaxy. General Steve Carter's voice carried the weight of absolute confidence as he addressed the galaxy from the command center of the Sol Defense Network. "The age of Council dominance is over," he announced. "The future belongs to civilizations that can work together as equals rather than rulers and subjects." The responses from across the galaxy confirmed what everyone in the Council chamber already knew. The old order was finished. Species after species announced their withdrawal from Council authority and their intention to join the Terran Confederation. Even among the core Council worlds, planetary governments were splitting from their imperial leadership to seek membership in the new alliance. Vextar made one final attempt to salvage Council authority. "The galaxy will descend into chaos without the stabilizing influence of experienced leadership," he declared. "Your confederation will collapse under the weight of its own ambitions." Jake Morrison gathered his materials with the calm efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment for 3 years. The mask of diplomatic humility was gone forever, replaced by the confidence of a representative of equals rather than supplicants. "Perhaps," he said as he walked toward the chamber exit, "but at least it will be our chaos to make and our mistakes to learn from. The galaxy has been stable under Council rule, but it hasn't grown. It hasn't advanced. It hasn't included everyone who had something to contribute." He paused at the chamber doors and looked back at the assembled delegates one final time. "You taught us that respect must be earned. You taught us that wisdom comes with experience. You taught us that patience is the greatest virtue. Thank you for those lessons. We've learned them well." As the doors closed behind him, the Galactic Council found itself facing a galaxy that no longer recognized their authority. The Terran Confederation was not just a human achievement, but the beginning of a new era where advancement came through inclusion rather than exclusion, where strength came through cooperation rather than domination. The Council had created their own replacement by underestimating the species they thought they were teaching. Now they would have to learn what it meant to be equals in a galaxy that humanity had quietly, patiently, and thoroughly revolutionized while their teachers weren't watching.